Good morning readers, it's Tilly here from Tilly's Shelf and welcome to another Bookish Breakfast. Before I get too far into things, I would like to issue kind of like a disclaimer to apologise for any like weird ill noises that I make over the course of this video. I do apologise for any like disgusting sounds that you may hear. Whenever I say things like that, I'm always like really strongly reminded of Mary Musgrove in Persuasion when she's like, I am so ill, I can hardly speak. And I'm not really that ill, I just have a bunged up nose because it's the winter. So the other thing I wanted to say before I get started on the content of the video, which is going to be a review of some reading challenges that I had in 2019, I also wanted to say that my wonderful mother joined me last week on this for Bookish Boxing Day, and we looked at all of her top books of the year for 2019, and she now has her own channel, which started yesterday. You heard it here first, apart from those of you who heard it from her first. Her channel is called, I'm going to try and link it below, but sometimes on the mobile thing it's hard to do that like very easily. I just struggle with the mobile technology stuff. So her channel is called Scallydandling About the Books, but those of you who know her otherwise will know her as Ros Cook from previous comments, and I think it's from the same channel that she's just changed the name. So if she's made a comment on one of your videos, you'll be able to find the link from her name, or you could just search Scallydandling About the Books. I think it's quite a unique and awesome name for a channel. And her first video was a really fascinating review of a book called Zorba the Greek that I had never heard of before she said that she was reading it, and I really enjoyed the review, and now I would like to go and read that. So yeah, basically if you like this channel, then you will definitely like my mum's channel, because it's just going to be similar reading tastes but much better quality content, and I love her and I think she's awesome, and I think you should all go and give her a warm welcome to BookTube. So anyway, that was the rambling introduction. This is another one of those videos where I'm going into work, so I should probably try and be succinct. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read through, I had, as part of a local reading group, I had a set of 12 reading challenges that I was supposed to try and like tick off as the year went on, and I'm quite like non-committal when it comes to challenges, and I feel like if I tell myself I've got to do these challenges, I will probably fail. So what I did at the start of 2019 was I was like, oh yeah, I'll participate, but I'll just tick off any challenges that I happen to get. And I did relatively well for saying that I didn't deliberately go out of my way to do them. I did relatively well. So I thought, basically I'm just going to read you the 12 challenges and the books that I read to meet them. Way more of a complicated explanation than you needed for that. So this was like a local reading group. I think there was like about 50 people were all feeding into this spreadsheet, and like making little posts to discuss the books that we'd read for different categories. So the first challenge was a book connected with the sea. I had a couple of different books that would have fit that challenge in different ways, but I eventually chose to put down African Titanics by Bakr Khal, and that was a book that it's by an Eritrean author who now I think he lives in maybe Denmark or Holland, and it's a fictional book but heavily influenced by personal experience about the journey from Eritrea across the Sahara to the Mediterranean, and the issues with crossing the Mediterranean, excuse me, in the small boats that people are forced to use. So I read this one because of the kind of project that I started this year about people and borders, when I was trying to understand a little bit more about the kind of refugee process, in terms of helping me with the voluntary work that I was doing. So that was a book connected with the sea. The second challenge was a book of historical fiction or non-fiction, and for this I have put down Moon Tiger by Penelope Lively, which was one of the first books I read in 2019. To be honest, I think when I first read it, I made a little review of it and I was quite positive about it, but it's not a book that has really like survived very well in my memory. I don't really think that I enjoyed it in a very enduring way, but it is a story about an older woman kind of looking back on her life in particular. I think there are things to do with the Second World War, there are things to do with like her children and their upbringing, or her child perhaps, and like the relationships that she had with them, and it's like the it's not a linear timeline. It's one of those books that kind of goes backwards and forwards in a slightly a mixed together, confusing / dreamlike way. It was an interesting read, but yeah, probably not the top of my best books of 2019 list. The next challenge was a book by a winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature, and I read the first part of Kristin Lavransdatter by Sigrid Undset while we were in Norway, because I was trying to read books that were from Norway while we were in Norway, and that was really enjoyable. I read the old translation and everyone says that it's awful, but I actually really enjoyed it, but then I don't have the new translation to compare it to. But yeah, I enjoyed it, and that was the is it called the wreath or the bridal wreath? I think it depends on the translation which it's called. So that was my book by a winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature. Then the next challenge is a book from the 2018 bestseller list. So I didn't think that I'd managed to achieve that, because I kept looking down lists of bestsellers and finding like nothing that was of any interest to me. I just don't tend to read such modern books that are actually popular. But then I was looking at what other people had read for this category, and somebody had put down This Is Going to Hurt by Adam Kay, and I have indeed read This Is Going to Hurt by Adam Kay this year. And I would say it is one of my top books of the year. It was so relevant to me personally, even though it's no great work of literature, but it is a great work of analysis of the NHS without even really trying to be. It's just one junior doctor's experience, but it is so reflective of how the system works. Or doesn't work. So yeah, so that was a book that I read that apparently was a bestseller in 2018, which I didn't know. The next challenge I did not achieve, and that was a book with the time in the title, so it could be years or hours or anything like that. I don't know whether I might have, because there was a whole period in the middle of this year when I didn't make any booktube videos and I didn't really keep up with this list, but I was still reading, so I don't know whether there's any book that I read in that time that I forgot about that I might possibly have applied, but yeah, I can't think of anything that I read that had the time in the title. Then the next one was a book with the weather in the title, e.g. storm, rain, etc. And I read for this The Lightless Sky by Gulwali, Passarlay, which was another one that I read for this sort of People and Borders type project that I did. So this was about his experience leaving Afghanistan as, I think, he was like 12 or 14, something like that, and being effectively trafficked or smuggled across from Afghanistan all the way across Europe. And that was another one, yeah, again, I read it to better understand that kind of process. The writing wasn't maybe the pinnacle, but the explanation of the issues and his experience, particularly as somebody who is roughly my age, so he is probably, when he arrived in the UK, he would have been like in my year group at school, so it was quite interesting to me to see, I know it's obvious, people grow up with different experiences, but just how different our lives were, where it was the same time frame and the same things that were going on, and we were having like completely different experiences, and just how his journey kind of panned out. So that was a really interesting book. The next challenge was an Agatha Christie novel, which was just like, that was a gift to me, because that's just so easy for me to do. And I put down The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. Again, this was one that I did a short review of towards the beginning of the year. It's one of my favourite ever Agatha Christie books, and this was the first time that I'd read it. Yeah, I would highly recommend it. If you're looking for, if you've read some Agatha Christie's and found that they're not always for you, then I would probably say try The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, because it is really, yeah, it was good for an Agatha Christie. I mean, on the scale of great literature, you know, maybe not right at the top, but it was really good for an Agatha Christie. Conversely, the next challenge was a detective story, so obviously I went for another Agatha Christie, and I put down Evil Under the Sun, and that is probably the worst Agatha Christie that I've read, and I strongly would not recommend it, and I found it very bound by tropes and cliches. And it's interesting because they're both Poirots, and normally I prefer Miss Marple's, but this was like a Poirot that I loved and a Poirot that was just awful. So yes, that was those two. The next challenge was a book of poetry, and weirdly this year I've probably read more poetry than any year other than 2018. I think I did pretty well on poetry in 2018. But I haven't read a whole book. Like, I've read quite a lot out of my Victorian anthology. I've read whole chunks of my Wordsworth collection. I have, I really started and really tried to read in memoriam a HH by Tennyson. That was part of Jason's mortality project. Sorry, the cat just knocked the camera chair. But I haven't read a whole book, so I can't say that I achieved that one. The next one was a book on the current GCSE English literature list, which I think is a really interesting challenge to have. And I didn't achieve that one either, but I just want to read you the ones that are on the list. So Macbeth, I've definitely read that previously. The Tempest, I've definitely read that previously. Romeo and Juliet, I've definitely read that previously. Much Ado About Nothing, I've studied that. Twelfth Night, I've starred in that. Much as Duke Orsino. On the heights of my short acting career as the secondary school student. The Merchant of Venice, I've studied that, and Julius Caesar, I read that for Shake Tube in 2018. So I don't feel like I like, it's not like you can never read a Shakespeare play twice, but there's nothing super new on the Shakespeare list. Their 19th century novel, Jane Eyre, I've read that countless times. Great Expectations, I read that once a while ago. A Christmas Carol, I read literally between Christmas 2018 and New Year 2019, so I so nearly had it in like to fit into this category. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, I read that twice in 2018. I read that for Victober, and I think I read it once previously as well. Pride and Prejudice, I've obviously read that countless times. Silas Marner, I read that for Victober 2018. Frankenstein is just one of the worst books ever, but I have indeed read it. The War of the Worlds, I'm not sure if I have read that. And The Sign of the Four by Arthur Conan Doyle, that's a Sherlock Holmes. I've read that twice. Then post-1914 British play or novel, I've read An Inspector Calls, I've read Animal Farm, I've read A Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. That was the chunk that I was going to try and pick one off, and I was going to try and read Journey's End by R.C. Sheriff, because I read a bit about it and it sounded like my kind of play. But in the end I didn't manage to get hold of it, so I don't feel like I failed that category, because it's not like I've not read any of them. But yeah, I didn't actually succeed in it, so yeah. Then the next category was a book that teaches you a new skill, and I've put down Tropical Medicine Microscopy, and I haven't put down an author for that, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't just have one author. But that was just a book that I've been using in my course that is just teaching me how to tell the difference between different kinds of malaria parasite in blood cells, and things like that. So that has definitely helped me to learn the skill of microscopy, which is something that I've never done previously. The next and final challenge is a book with a body part in the title, and for all of the medical memoirs that I've read this year, I think the closest I got was When Breath Becomes Air, but breath unfortunately is a body function, not a body part, so I did fail that one, unless, like I say, unless I read one and forgot about it somehow. But yeah, so I failed 4 challenges, is that? Out of 12, so that's not doing too badly. Anyway, I hope this was vaguely interesting. There is another set of challenges for 2020. I will just briefly read you the categories. I haven't decided what they're going to be for me. An unread book from your own bookshelf, a book from the BBC's 100 Books That Changed History, I think it's going to be. It cuts out. A children's book published since you became an adult, a book you spot a stranger reading, a Penguin classic, a prequel or sequel, a book with an emotion in the title, a World War II tale, a story set in or about prehistory or ancient history, a supernatural book, a book about space, fiction or non-fiction, a book connected with music, and then there's also going to be a decades challenge and a rainbow challenge. And the one thing I haven't mentioned is the alphabet challenge, but I'm going to try and talk about the alphabet challenge next week. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, and Happy New Year as well to everybody. Happy New Year, and I will speak to you soon.